The silence in the human embassy felt different today. Ambassador David Miller placed another photo frame into the shipping container, this one showing him shaking hands with delegates from 17 different species. The glass reflected the empty walls behind him where certificates and treaties had hung for 12 years. Outside the window, Council Station Harmony continued its endless rotation, beautiful and bright, completely unaware that something fundamental had just broken. Resolution 7749 had passed 2 days ago. 23 votes in favor, 1 against, 1 abstention. The numbers kept playing in David's mind like a song he couldn't stop hearing. The resolution text was simple enough that anyone could understand it. Human expansion into new sectors would be limited. Human colony applications would require approval from 3 council committees instead of 1, and human trade agreements would face additional scrutiny for aggressive economic practices. The Voltan delegation had written it. The Messin had seconded it. Species that humans had helped for decades had voted yes without hesitation. David wasn't angry. Anger required energy he no longer had. He just felt tired. Sir, the medical staff sent their final reports. Dr. Ruth Hayes walked in carrying a data pad. Her eyes were red, though she hadn't cried in front of anyone. All patient transfers are complete. The Drellin child with the spinal condition made it to their homeworld safely. She wanted me to tell you thank you. That's good, David said, sealing another box. Did you send the treatment protocols to their doctors? All of them free of charge like always. Ruth set down the pad. They voted yes too, didn't they, the Drellin? David nodded. He didn't trust himself to say more. Across the station, in the Grand Council chamber, High Councilor Brex was celebrating. The Voltan stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scaled skin shimmering under the lights as he addressed his supporters. Today we have corrected a dangerous imbalance. The humans expanded too fast, claimed too much, and their economic dominance threatened the sovereignty of independent species. We have restored fairness to the Council. The room erupted in approval. Species that had watched human ships leap from system to system, that had seen human colonies spring up on worlds they considered too harsh, that had witnessed human businesses outcompete their own. Finally felt vindicated. The humans had been polite about it, of course. They always were. But everyone knew that politeness masked ambition. Councilor Nira of the Messin sat quietly in her seat while others celebrated. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't name it. She had voted yes because the economic data seemed clear. Humans controlled 37% of medical supply chains, 42% of infrastructure maintenance contracts, and 60% of educational exchange programs. Those numbers looked like monopoly. They looked like control. But when David Miller had stood to acknowledge the vote, he hadn't argued. He hadn't threatened. He had simply said, "Humanity respects the Council's decision. We will begin withdrawal procedures immediately." That was it, no drama, no warnings, just acceptance. The human staff worked through the night, methodical and efficient. They transferred ongoing projects to other species. They sent detailed instructions for equipment maintenance. They copied research data into open databases. They canceled contracts, closed accounts, and packed belongings. By the time most of the station woke up, the human embassy was already half empty. "They're really leaving," Ambassador Fell of the Trell said, watching the human cargo ships dock and depart with mathematical precision. The Trell had abstained from the vote, one of the few species that had studied humans long enough to understand them. Fell's translator made his clicking language sound melancholic. "This will not end well." His aide, young and optimistic, shook his head. "The Council will adapt. Other species will fill the gaps. Humans were useful but not irreplaceable." Fell said nothing. He had lived through 3 centuries and seen civilizations rise and fall. He recognized something in the humans that his aide was too young to understand. They were Deathworlders, yes. They came from a planet that tried to kill them in 1,000 different ways, but they hadn't responded by becoming conquerors. They had responded by becoming builders, helpers, teachers, and when pushed away, they didn't fight back. They just left. That was somehow worse. In the medical wing, a Voltan doctor noticed that their supply of broad-spectrum antibiotics was running low. Order more from the usual supplier, she told her assistant. That was Terran Pharmaceuticals, the assistant replied. They've closed their council. Operations. Then find another supplier. The assistant returned an hour later with bad news. The next cheapest option costs 4 times as much, and they can't deliver for 6 weeks. The doctor stared at her patient list. 3 emergency cases needed those antibiotics within days, not weeks. She had never thought to ask why human medicine was so affordable. She had assumed it was because they were competing for market share. The possibility that they had been selling at cost never occurred to her. David Miller sent his final transmission from the embassy at midnight station time. His face appeared on screens across council space, calm and professional as always. On behalf of humanity, I thank the Council for 12 years of cooperation. As of today, all human diplomatic, economic, and military personnel will withdraw from Council space. Our trade will continue at standard market rates for any species that wishes it, but our programs, subsidies, and partnerships are concluded. We wish you all success in your future endeavors. The transmission ended. The screen went dark. High Counselor Brex poured himself a drink and smiled. They fold so easily. We should have done this years ago. Now the galaxy will see that the Council doesn't need human charity. Nira watched the human ships form up in perfect formation, hundreds of vessels moving like a school of fish, and felt a cold weight settle in her chest. They weren't angry. They weren't making threats. They were just going home. Somehow that felt more ominous than any show of force could have been. The last human ship left Council space exactly 72 hours after the vote. They departed quietly, without fanfare, leaving behind empty offices and canceled contracts and 1,000 small gaps that nobody had noticed before. The Council celebrated its independence. The parties lasted for days. Nobody realized yet that the silence the humans left behind would soon be filled with screaming. The first crack appeared in the medical ward of Station Harmony exactly 47 days after the humans left. A Voltan child named Cree lay in bed, her breathing shallow, while her parents held her small hands. The disease eating through her nervous system had a name nobody could pronounce, but everyone knew it had a cure. Or rather, it used to have a cure. I don't understand, Cree's mother said, her voice breaking. The treatment exists, why can't we get it? The doctor pulled up her screen, showing the supply chain data. The synthesis process for this particular compound was developed by human researchers. They shared the formula freely, but the production requires equipment and expertise we don't have. Before, we simply ordered it from Earth. Now, she trailed off, gesturing helplessly at the empty order form. So make it here, Cree's father demanded. We have laboratories, scientists. We tried. The yield is 7% of what the human facilities achieved. It would take us 6 months to produce enough for 1 dose. Your daughter has 3 weeks. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stars. Cross-council space, similar scenes played out in 100 hospitals, 1,000 clinics, 10,000 medical centers. The drugs weren't gone, not exactly. But the human manufacturers who had sold them at cost were gone. The companies that remained charged market rates, which meant a single dose now cost what a family might earn in a year. Insurance programs that humans had quietly subsidized were failing. Research projects humans had funded were shutting down. Counselor Nira sat in her office, surrounded by data screens that painted an increasingly grim picture. She had started investigating 3 weeks ago after the first supply shortage reports came in. What she found made her want to scream. Humans hadn't just participated in council medical programs. They had essentially been running them. 73% of new drug development had human funding. 81% of medical training programs had human instructors. 92% of emergency response networks used human logistics. And almost all of it had been provided at massive losses that humans absorbed without complaint. This can't be right, she muttered, pulling up the financial records again. The numbers didn't change. Humans had been spending 4.7 trillion credits annually to keep council medical infrastructure running. Not charging, spending. The money just flowed out of Earth and into programs across the galaxy, invisible and unacknowledged. Her assistant brought more news. The environmental systems are failing in sectors 12 through 18. What, how? The maintenance crews were 60% human. The remaining engineers can't keep up. They're saying the systems are more complex than documented. Neera closed her eyes. Course they are. Humans probably simplified them over time and never bothered to mention it because they were always here to fix things. An emergency council session was called. The chamber felt different now, less triumphant. Species that had celebrated human departure were facing supply shortages, system failures, and angry constituents demanding to know why everything was getting worse instead of better. High Counselor Breck stood at the podium, his scales no longer shimmering quite so brightly. These are temporary disruptions. Markets will adjust. Other species will step up to fill the void. We simply need to be patient. Patient? A Drellin representative stood, her tentacles quivering with rage. My colony world has 3 cases of red fever. The cure exists but costs more than our entire annual budget. Before the humans left, they would have sent it free of charge. How patient should we be while our children die? The humans were creating dependency, Brex argued. They made you reliant on their charity to maintain control. They charged us nothing, the Drellin shot back. How is that control? Neera stood slowly. May I present my findings to the council? The chamber quieted. Everyone knew Neera had been digging into human economic activities. Many hoped she would prove Brex right, that she would show evidence of human manipulation or hidden costs. Instead, she projected her data for all to see. Humans operated 32,000 programs across council space, she began. Medical, educational, infrastructure, disaster relief, scientific research, cultural exchange, and more. I have analyzed the financial records of each one. The total annual cost to humanity was 4.7 trillion credits. The total revenue they received was 400 billion credits. They were operating at a 91% loss. The silence was absolute. But surely they profited in other ways, someone said weakly. Trade advantages, political influence, resource access. Neera shook her head. I checked. Human trade deals were consistently favorable to their partners. Their political influence was used almost exclusively to mediate disputes between other species. Their resource extraction was lower per capita than any other spacefaring civilization. They gave more than they took in every measurable category. Then why, Brex demanded, what was their game? I don't think there was one, Neera said quietly. I think they just helped because they could. The chamber erupted in argument. Some refused to believe it. Others were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. The shouting grew louder until alarms started blaring. Hull breach in Sector 15, a station AI announced. Life support failing in Sectors 12 through 19, evacuation protocols initiated. Engineers scrambled. They worked for 6 hours straight, trying to repair systems they didn't fully understand. They managed to stop the breach, but 3 sectors remained without full life support. 200 beings had to be relocated. An investigation revealed that the maintenance schedule humans had left was incomplete because they had always just known what to check based on experience. That knowledge was gone now. On Earth, Ruth Hayes watched the news reports with tears in her eyes. We should help them, she told David. They don't want our help, David replied. They want independence, we're giving it to them. People are dying. I know, his voice cracked. But we can't force them to accept what they've rejected. All we can do is wait and hope they figure it out before it's too late. Back on Station Harmony, Kree's parents made a desperate decision. They sold everything they owned and booked passage to Earth, hoping that human doctors might still treat their daughter. It was illegal now to seek human services without council approval. They didn't care. Neera watched them go and wondered how many others would follow. Then she returned to her data, digging deeper, and began to understand that medicine was just the beginning. The humans had their hands in everything, supporting, maintaining, fixing, teaching, and never asking for recognition. They had been the invisible pillars holding up the entire council structure. And now those pillars were gone. The diplomatic message arrived at 400 station time, marked urgent priority. Ambassador Fell read it twice, then a third time, hoping the words would somehow change. They didn't. The broken reach colonies were starving. 18 worlds, 4 billion people, crops failing because the agricultural support humans had provided was gone. They want emergency aid, Fell's assistant said. They're requesting council intervention. Fell looked at the request with ancient eyes. The council has no emergency aid infrastructure. The humans were the emergency aid. Infrastructure. The realization was spreading like ice water through council space. Every time someone identified a problem and asked who could fix it, the answer came back the same. The humans used to handle that. The humans had equipment for that. The humans knew how to do that. Always the humans, always past tense. 4 months after the withdrawal, the Galactic Trade Network experienced what analysts politely called volatility and everyone else called chaos. Routes that connected poor outer systems to wealthy core worlds were suddenly unprofitable. Shipping companies stopped servicing them. The prices for basic goods in frontier regions tripled, then quadrupled. Why did these routes exist if they lost money? A Messin economist asked during an emergency trade conference. Nira, who had become something of an expert on human economic activities, answered quietly. Because humans ran them at a loss. They considered it an investment in stability. That's insane, the economist sputtered. No rational actor operates at a persistent loss. Humans do, Nira replied. They did it for everything: trade, medicine, education, infrastructure. They built a support system for the entire council and never mentioned it because they didn't think it needed mentioning. The economist stared at his data, watching trade routes collapse in real time. What kind of species does that? Ambassador Fell had an answer, though nobody asked him. A species that learned cooperation on a death world. A species that survived by helping each other because individual strength wasn't enough. They brought that philosophy to the stars, and we mistook it for weakness. Station harmony was dying slowly. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a steady degradation that ground down everyone living there. Environmental systems ran at 80% efficiency. Communications had a 2-second lag. Medical facilities operated on rationed supplies. Education programs shut down. Cultural centers closed. The station that had once been the jewel of council space was becoming a barely functional shell. High Counselor Brex called for an emergency session. The attendance was poor. 3 species had already withdrawn from the council, claiming they couldn't afford the membership fees now that humans weren't subsidizing station operations. 7 more were threatening to leave. We need to address this systematically, Brex announced, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Each species must contribute more to maintain shared infrastructure. With what funds? The Drellin representative demanded. Our economy is in freefall. The humans bought 60% of our mineral exports at above market rates. They're gone. Nobody else wants our minerals at any price. Then diversify your economy, Brex suggested. We were diversifying. Human educators were training our workers in new industries. That program is gone too. Similar stories emerged from every corner of council space. The Voltan mining operations that humans had purchased from to maintain diplomatic goodwill were shutting down. The Messin art colonies that humans had supported as cultural exchange were bankrupt. The Trell research stations that humans had funded to encourage scientific development were closing. Everywhere, the pattern repeated. Humans had been buying, supporting, funding, teaching, and maintaining, not because they needed to, but because they wanted to help. We have to contact them, Nira said. We have to negotiate their return. No, Brex insisted. That would be admitting we were wrong. It would give them leverage over us. They already have leverage, Nira shot back. They have it because we need them and they don't need us. They never did. We just never realized it. A new crisis interrupted their argument. Fighting had broken out between Voltan and Drellin forces over a disputed mining system. It started as a border skirmish. Within hours, it escalated to fleet engagement. Without human mediators, nobody could negotiate a ceasefire. Without human peacekeeping forces, nobody could enforce one. The first casualties were reported the next day. 17 dead, hundreds wounded. It was the first military conflict between Council species in 43 years. The last one had ended when humans offered to mediate and both sides, exhausted, accepted. On Earth, David Miller watched the reports with a heavy heart. His staff wanted to help. They had plans ready, diplomatic channels established, peacekeeping forces on standby. He made them stand down. "They need to learn this lesson," he said. "If we rush in to save them every time, they'll never understand what they had." "People are dying," Ruth protested. "I know, and I hate it. But if we enable their dependency again, more people will die in the future. They have to build their own systems. They have to learn to cooperate without us." But even as he spoke, humanitarian ships were being loaded. Medical supplies, food, disaster relief equipment. All going to planets in crisis, sent with no strings attached and no demands for recognition. Humans helping because people needed help, regardless of politics. When Brex learned that human aid was still flowing to desperate worlds, he saw opportunity. "You see, they need us to need them. This gives us leverage." Neera looked at him with something close to pity. "You still don't understand. They're helping because people are suffering. Not for leverage, not for political gain, just because it's the right thing to do." "Nobody operates that way," Brex insisted. "Humans do," Neera said. "That's what we lost." The fighting between Voltan and Drellin intensified. 3 more species declared conflicts with neighbors over old grievances. The Council, which had maintained peace for nearly a century, was fragmenting. And in the silence where human voices used to mediate and calm and find compromise, there was only growing violence. Ambassador Fell sent a message to Earth, simple and direct. "We were wrong, we need help, please." The response came from David Miller. "We're sending humanitarian aid where needed, but the Council must solve its own political problems. That's what independence means." Fell showed the message to Neera. She read it and finally understood. The humans weren't coming back to save them. They had given the Council exactly what it asked for, complete independence from human influence. And the Council was discovering that independence was much harder than they had imagined. The delegation's ship approached Earth under heavy security. Not because Earth had threatened them, but because 3 species had already attempted to hijack the vessel, desperate to prevent any agreement that might favor the Voltan over themselves. Council space was eating itself alive, and the delegation represented a last hope for survival. Councilor Neera led the group, chosen because she at least understood what they had lost. High Councilor Brex came too, though his position was increasingly ceremonial. His government had quietly removed most of his actual power after the full extent of the crisis became clear. Representatives from medical, educational, and infrastructure sectors filled out the roster, each carrying lists of demands and desperate pleas. Earth looked different than Neera remembered. The orbital stations had expanded, new construction everywhere, ships moving in patterns that spoke of efficiency and purpose. Humanity was thriving. They had taken all the resources they'd been pouring into Council space and redirected them inward. The results were staggering. The delegation was received politely in Geneva, not coldly but without warmth, professional. The humans who met them were courteous, efficient, and unmistakably distant. They were shown comfortable quarters, offered refreshments, and scheduled for meetings. Everything proper, nothing personal. David Miller met them in a conference room overlooking the Alps. He looked older, Neera thought, tired, but also somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you for seeing us," Neera began. "We understand you're under no obligation to meet with Council representatives." "You're not Council representatives anymore," David corrected gently. "You're representatives from individual species who happen to be part of a political organization we no longer participate in, But yes, we're willing to talk. What can we do for you? Brex bristled at the tone. You can return to the Council and resume your obligations to galactic stability. David's expression didn't change. We have no obligations to galactic stability. We chose to help maintain it. You chose to reject that help. We respected your choice. People are dying, the medical representative said. Diseases we could cure, disasters we could prevent, conflicts we could mediate. You have the capability to help, but you're choosing not to. We're sending humanitarian aid to genuine emergencies, David replied. But we're not rebuilding infrastructure you allowed to collapse. We're not subsidizing economies you mismanaged. And we're not mediating conflicts you started. Those are your responsibilities now. Neera spoke carefully. We understand we made mistakes. We underestimated how much you were doing. We took your help for granted. We're prepared to acknowledge that publicly and formally apologize. We don't need an apology, David said. We need to know what's changed, because here's the problem. You didn't reject our help because it was ineffective. You rejected it because you were afraid of us. Afraid of our expansion, our economic success, our influence. Those things haven't changed. We're still expanding. Our economy is. Still growing, we still have influence. So what's different now besides the fact that you need us? The question hung in the air like a blade. Brex couldn't help himself. We're prepared to pay for your services, market rates plus premium for expedited delivery. Name your price. David turned to look at him directly. You think this is about money? Everything is about money or power. Those are the only currencies that matter. To you, maybe? David pulled up a display showing human activities over the past 7 months. New colonies established, scientific breakthroughs, cultural achievements, medical advances. This is what we've done since leaving Council space. We're not suffering, we're flourishing, we don't need your money. Then what do you want? The infrastructure representative asked. What would bring you back? David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. We wanted to be partners, friends. We wanted to build something together where everyone contributed what they could and everyone benefited. We never asked to lead the Council. We never demanded special treatment. We just helped where we saw need, and we hoped others would do the same. That's exactly what we're offering now, Neera said. Partnership on equal terms. No, David replied. You're offering partnership because you're desperate. That's not the same thing. Real partnership means working together when times are good, not just when you need rescue. It means trusting each other, respecting each other's choices, supporting each other's growth. You voted to restrict us because you were afraid we'd get too strong. That's not partnership, that's competition. The delegation shifted uncomfortably. Everything David said was true, and they all knew it. So what do we need to do? Neera asked. How do we prove we've changed? You don't prove it to us, David said. You prove it to yourselves. Build your own systems. Solve your own problems. Learn to cooperate with each other instead of competing for scraps. When you've built something sustainable, something that helps everyone instead of just the powerful, then maybe we can talk about partnership. How long will that take? Brex demanded. Months, years, how many more need to die while we learn these lessons? David's expression finally showed emotion. Pain. I don't know, but I do know this. If we come back now and fix everything, you won't learn anything. You'll just wait for the next crisis and expect us to solve that too. We'd be enabling the same broken system that led to Resolution 7749 in the first place. You're punishing us, Brex accused. No, David said. We're letting you grow up. There's a difference. The meeting ended without agreement. The delegation returned to their ship in shock. They had come expecting negotiation, compromise, deals. Instead, they got a mirror held up to their own failures and a cold dose of reality. The humans didn't need them. They had never needed them. Neera sent her report to the Council. It was honest and brutal. The humans will not return on any terms we can offer. They have moved beyond us. If we want their partnership again, we must become worthy of it. That means fixing our own societies, our own economies, our own conflicts. We must prove we can stand on our own before they will stand with us. The response from Council space was predictable. Some species accepted the challenge and began serious reforms. Others doubled down on blame, insisting humans had a moral duty to help. Brex's faction started organizing a formal censure of Earth, as if passing another resolution would somehow matter. And on Earth, David Miller sat in his office and waited, hoping the Council would prove him wrong, hoping they would find the strength to save themselves. The war spread like poison through water. What started as a border dispute between Voltan and Drellin forces metastasized into something worse. Old grievances, suppressed for decades by human mediation, erupted everywhere at once. The Messin closed their borders. The Trell withdrew to their home systems. Species that had coexisted peacefully for generations were suddenly enemies. Station Harmony was evacuated on day 207 after the human departure. The environmental systems finally gave up completely, and there was nobody left who knew how to fix them. 30,000 beings scrambled for transport while life support died around them. Some didn't make it. Nira watched from a refugee ship as the station's lights flickered and died. That beautiful symbol of galactic unity, dark and lifeless, spinning uselessly in space. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. She had cried herself empty weeks ago. High Counselor Brex was arrested on day 212. Not by the Council, which no longer had enforcement power, but by his own government. Records had surfaced showing he knew about human contributions before pushing Resolution 7749. He had seen the economic data, understood what humanity was doing, and decided Voltan interests were more important than galactic stability. He wanted human competition eliminated so Voltan corporations could dominate. His trial was brief. The evidence was overwhelming. He was stripped of all titles and exiled to a remote colony world. On his last day of freedom, reporters asked him if he had any regrets. "I regret nothing," he said. "I did what I thought was right for my people." "Your people are dying in a war you helped start," a reporter pointed out. Brex had no answer for that. Ambassador fell addressed what remained of the Council from his homeworld. Most species no longer sent representatives to Council chambers. There was no point. The organization existed in name only. "We Trell have observed humanity for 3 generations, Fell said, his image transmitted across fragmented space. "We watched them emerge from their violent world and expected them to be conquerors. Instead, they became builders. We have a saying, the Death World teaches 2 lessons, fight alone and die alone, or cooperate and survive. Humans learned the second lesson. We apparently needed to learn it too." His words resonated with some. Reform movements started on several worlds. New governments formed, prioritizing cooperation over competition. But it was slow, painful work, and people were suffering while politicians debated. The fighting continued. 300 dead became 3,000, then 30,000. The Voltan homeworld was blockaded by Drellin forces. Drellin colonies were bombarded from orbit, and through it all, the galaxy waited for someone to stop the violence. On Earth, the debate raged in Parliament. The humanitarian faction argued for intervention. "We have the capacity to stop this. Every day we wait, more people die." The independence faction countered. "If we intervene now, we validate their dependence. They'll never learn." David Miller listened to both sides, torn between his heart and his head. Finally, he spoke. "We'll help anyone who asks, but they have to ask, and they have to mean it. No more taking our help while resenting our existence. No more accepting our aid while voting to restrict us. If they want partnership, they have to actually want it." The message went out to all Council worlds. Earth offers mediation, humanitarian relief, and peacekeeping forces to any species that requests them. No conditions, no demands for political concessions, just help freely given to those who freely ask. The responses came slowly at first. Pride was hard to swallow. But as the casualties mounted one by one, species reached out. The Drellin asked for medical aid. The Voltan requested food shipments. Smaller species caught in the crossfire begged for peacekeepers. Earth responded to every request, but they didn't send diplomats to broker peace. They sent doctors to treat wounded. They sent supplies to feed hungry. They sent peacekeepers to protect civilians. They helped people, but they didn't solve the political problems. Those the council species had to solve themselves. Nera, now appointed emergency coordinator by what remained of the council, worked 18-hour days trying to negotiate ceasefires. It was brutal, thankless work. Species that had relied on human diplomacy to smooth over conflicts had no idea how to compromise on their own. Every negotiation was a battle, every agreement fragile. But slowly, painfully, progress happened. The Voltan and Drellin agreed to a temporary ceasefire to allow humanitarian corridors. The Messin reopened some trade routes under neutral supervision. The Trell offered their stations as neutral meeting grounds. None of it would have been possible before the humans left. The species had been too comfortable letting others solve their problems. On day 293, something unexpected happened. A massive stellar event was detected in the Broken Reach. A star going critical, unstable, ready to explode. 14 million beings lived in that system. They had 72 hours before the radiation wave would sterilize every planet. The distress signal went out across the galaxy. Every species checked their evacuation capacity. The numbers were brutal. Even combining every available ship, they could maybe save 8 million. 6 million would die. The message reached Earth within minutes. Cabinet was called into emergency session. The data was clear. Humans had the ships, the logistics, the experience to evacuate everyone. But it would require committing almost their entire civilian fleet. If anything went wrong, if the star went critical early, thousands of human ships and crews would die. "We have to try," Ruth Hayes said. "We can't just abandon 6 million people." "They're not our responsibility," someone argued. "They voted to make us leave. Why should we risk human lives for them?" David stood slowly. "Because that's not who we are. We don't let people die to make a point. We help because we can, because it's right. Because if we lose that, we lose what makes us human." The vote was called. It was unanimous. Every ship that could fly was mobilized. Every volunteer crew was activated. The largest rescue operation in galactic history was launched, and it had exactly 72 hours to succeed or fail catastrophically. The human fleet arrived in the Broken Reach system like a silver tide. Thousands of ships, from massive colony transports to small personal vessels, all converging on 14 worlds about to die. The local species watched in disbelief as the armada that could have conquered half the galaxy instead began the largest humanitarian operation in history. The coordination was beautiful to watch. Humans had done this before on Earth when hurricanes or earthquakes or floods threatened their own people. They knew how to organize chaos into order. Landing zones were designated, evacuation priorities established, medical triage set up, food and water distribution planned, all within the first hour. But the clock was ticking. 72 hours to move 14 million beings. Every second counted. On the ground, human volunteers worked alongside anyone willing to help. They didn't ask who voted for Resolution 7749. They didn't demand apologies. They just worked. A human medic treated a Voltan child with the same care she would give a human. A human pilot flew a Drellin family to safety without hesitation. A human engineer fixed an alien ship's engine so it could carry more refugees. Cree, the Voltan child from the medical ward, was on one of those worlds. Her parents had brought her to the Broken Reach for experimental treatment they couldn't afford anywhere else. Now they huddled in an evacuation center, watching human ships descend through darkening skies. The star above was visibly changing, its light taking on a sickly orange hue. "Why are they helping us?" Cree's mother asked a human volunteer. "We voted against them. We celebrated when they left. Why risk their lives for people who rejected them?" The volunteer, a young woman named Alice, smiled sadly. "Because your people in danger, that's all that matters. We don't help because we expect something in return. We help because we can." 48 hours in, disaster struck. A solar flare erupted earlier than predicted, hitting the outer worlds with intense radiation. 3 human ships were caught in the wave while evacuating a mining colony. They lost communications. Rescue teams diverted to find them, but time was running out. The main evacuation couldn't stop, so volunteers from evacuated worlds joined the search. Former enemies working together to save the people who came to save them. They found 2 ships. The crews were alive, shielded in emergency bunkers on the colony's surface. But the 3rd ship was gone, vaporized by the radiation. 412 humans died saving people who had voted to restrict them. The news spread across the fleet, across the galaxy. The rescuers kept working, but everyone understood now what this operation really meant. Humans were willing to die for people who had rejected them, not for politics, not for leverage, just because it was the right thing to do. With 12 hours remaining, the count was still short. 13.4 million evacuated. 600,000 remained. The star was becoming unstable, erratic. Staying longer risked the entire fleet. The logical choice was to leave, to save the ships and crews who had already done the impossible. David Miller made the call from Earth. We stay until everyone is out or until we have no choice. Not one person left behind if we can help it. The fleet stayed. Every ship pushed beyond safe limits. Humans and aliens worked side by side, moving people, supplies, equipment. The former council members saw humanity clearly for the first time, not as competitors or threats, but as partners who gave everything without asking for anything. Brex, living in exile on a remote world, watched the coverage. He saw humans dying to save people, saw the sacrifice and courage and simple decency, and something inside him broke. He had spent his life believing strength meant domination, that kindness was weakness. The humans proved him wrong with every ship that landed, every person they carried to safety, every volunteer who stayed behind to help one more family. With 2 hours left, the count reached 13.9 million. 100,000 remained, scattered across 2 distant colonies. The star was critical, fluctuating wildly. Fleet Command ordered. Withdrawal, the ships began to leave. But not all of them. 300 human vessels stayed, their crews volunteering for what was almost certainly a suicide mission. They raced to the final colonies, loaded every last person they could find, and burned for the jump point as the star entered its death throes. Neera watched from a command ship, holding her breath. The star exploded, the wave of death expanding at the speed of light. The volunteer ships jumped just seconds ahead of the blast, hulls glowing from radiation, systems failing but intact. All 300 made it out. 14 million beings saved, 412 humans dead, heroes who would never see home again. The galaxy mourned them, not just humans but every species. Memorials were erected on 100 worlds. The names of the fallen were recited in council chambers that had once voted to restrict the people who died saving them. 1 year later, a new council convened. Not on Station Harmony, which was being rebuilt by a cooperative effort of all species, but on a neutral world chosen specifically because it had no strategic value. The first order of business was a formal repeal of Resolution 7749. The vote was unanimous. The second order was an official apology to humanity read by Neera herself. We mistook your strength for weakness. We saw your kindness as manipulation. We took your friendship for granted and your sacrifices as obligations. We were wrong about everything. You walked away quietly when we rejected you. You helped anyway when we needed you. You died for people who voted against you. You showed us what true strength looks like. Not the power to dominate, but the choice to help even when you don't have to. David Miller accepted the apology on behalf of Earth. His terms for renewed partnership were simple. Equal contribution, mutual respect, honest cooperation. We won't subsidize your economies or solve your political problems, but we will stand with you as partners if you'll have us. The new council charter was signed that day. Humans returned to council space, but everything was different now. They were no longer the silent support system holding everything together. They were partners, working alongside species who had learned hard lessons about cooperation, sacrifice, and the true meaning of strength. Kree, now healthy and grown, became a doctor. She specialized in cross-species medicine, inspired by the humans who saved her life twice. On the wall of her office hung a picture of the memorial to the 412, a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and the greatest strength of all is choosing to help when you don't have to.